Imagine waking up in ancient Sparta, a place where boys were torn from their families at the age of 7 to endure the brutal agoge training, where kindness was weakness and silence was strength, where every meal was a bowl of disgusting black broth made from pig's blood and vinegar, where privacy didn't exist and men lived communally in barracks even after marriage, where your body was not your own but property of the state. Trained to march barefoot, fight relentlessly, and suppress pain to the point of embracing death with pride, where infants were inspected at birth and discarded if deemed weak, where sleep was scarce, discipline absolute, and the only goal in life was to serve as a cog in a merciless military machine, where questioning orders meant punishment, and individuality was crushed under the iron ethos of unity and strength, making it absolutely impossible for a modern person, accustomed to comfort, choice, and emotion, to endure even a single day without being broken, physically, mentally, and emotionally. Imagine, just for a moment, that you wake up not in your bed, not in your cozy apartment or house, but in the harsh, sun-scorched land of ancient Sparta, a society so radically different from anything you've ever known that it would feel less like traveling through time and more like being dropped onto another planet. Your clothes are taken, your name is stripped of its meaning, and your identity, your individuality. Everything that made you is now irrelevant, because in Sparta, you are not a person, you are a function, a tool for the state, born and bred for war. From the age of 7, you would have been yanked from your family, thrown into the agoge, the Spartan training system that turned boys into soldiers through relentless violence, starvation, beatings, humiliation, and psychological warfare. There are no toys, no bedtime stories, no gentle words, only pain, cold nights, and the ever-present threat of punishment if you speak out of turn, if you flinch, if you cry, because crying is weakness, and weakness is death. Imagine your daily life consisting of waking at dawn, your body bruised and dirty, being forced to steal food not for fun, but because you're not given enough to survive, and if you're caught, you're not punished for the theft but for being stupid enough to get caught. You're expected to fight other boys, to form bonds through pain and loyalty, to learn the art of silence and endurance. And even if your bones are broken or your spirit shattered, you must show no sign of suffering, because Spartans do not suffer. They endure, they overcome, or they die trying. Now fast forward to adulthood, if you survive that long, because many don't. Many are broken, discarded, or killed in training, and now you're no longer a boy, but a soldier, yet you still don't get to live freely, because your nights are spent in barracks, not with your family. Your meals are rationed black broth and barley, and your life revolves entirely around military duty, physical excellence, and obedience. You cannot question orders, cannot express doubt or fear, cannot dream of personal happiness, because Sparta does not care about dreams, only discipline, strength, and sacrifice. Now imagine trying to survive this as someone from the 21st century, raised in comfort, with smartphones, choices, emotional freedom, entertainment, therapy, and support. How would you cope without soft clothes, warm showers, friendly conversation, or even the right to say, "I don't want this"? You wouldn't, and not because you're weak, but because you were never meant to be a Spartan. because nobody outside of that brutal system could possibly adapt to a life where the only escape from pain is death or glory in battle, and even death must be embraced with stoic pride. So no, you couldn't survive a day in Sparta, not even an hour, because to live among the Spartans meant to erase yourself, to become a living weapon, and to accept that suffering was not a consequence of life, but its very purpose. And even if, by some miracle, you forced yourself to adapt, if you gritted your teeth through the hunger, the bruises, the blood, and the silence, you would still never truly belong. Because being Spartan was not just about training, not just about strength. It was about complete assimilation into a culture that rejected comfort, scorned art, mocked luxury, and lived by a philosophy of ruthless minimalism. There was no music in daily life, no storytelling for the sake of joy, no painting, no poetry unless it served to glorify war and discipline. Spartan society viewed aesthetics and intellect with suspicion unless they contributed to physical excellence or state loyalty. Even their language was terse, efficient, cutting, laconic, as the world would come to call it, not because they couldn't speak more, but because brevity was seen as another form of control, another mark of strength, and verbosity was weakness, indulgence, a sign of softness. Try holding back your thoughts, your opinions, your creativity, for a week. Now imagine doing it for a lifetime. And you'll understand the weight of the silence that hung over every Spartan camp and council. And if you were a woman, don't think you'd be spared, because Spartan girls, too, were trained to be strong, to fight, to bear pain, to scorn fear, and to prepare their bodies not for beauty or love, but for bearing warriors, for dying in childbirth without a scream, for telling their sons before battle, "Come back with your shield or on it." Imagine the pressure, the duty, the sheer intensity of living under such constant nationalistic expectation. There is no room in this world for hesitation, for emotional weakness, for a breakdown, for a moment of escape. No social media, no books to retreat into, no therapist to talk to, no safe space. Only the barracks, the battlefield, and the grave. The irony, of course, is that while modern people fantasize about the Spartans, about their strength, their simplicity, their warrior code, they often forget the price, that the cost of this brutal efficiency was the destruction of the self, the burial of compassion, the denial of dreams, the suppression of the soul. In Sparta, you didn't live, you endured, you marched, you bled, and if you were lucky, you died a noble death. Remembered not for your smile or your mind, but for how many enemies you cut down before falling. And even if you convince yourself that all this pain, all this sacrifice, serves some greater purpose, even if you told yourself that living without softness made you strong, that dying without fear made you honorable, sooner or later the cracks would show. Because deep inside every human being lies a need for connection, for kindness, for meaning beyond blood and steel. And in Sparta, those needs were not ignored, they were crushed. Buried under layers of ideology and duty, you'd look around and realize that no one would offer you a comforting word. No one would ask how you're feeling. Because to care openly was a betrayal of the code. Even mourning was restricted, because grief was weakness and weakness was infectious. And then you'd start to wonder, what am I living for? For glory? But whose glory? The states? The elders? The memory of a name chiseled into stone after a noble death in Thermopylae? And when the cheers faded, and your comrades lay dying in the mud beside you, would that glory fill the hole in your chest? Would it warm you when the nights were freezing and your body ached from constant training? Would it bring you peace when your own thoughts became your enemy, and you had nowhere to hide, because introspection was as forbidden as indulgence? In a place where questioning the system was punished and obedience revered above all else, your very nature, the part of you that seeks purpose, questions rules, longs for love, would be viewed as dangerous, something to be stamped out, trained away, beaten into silence. You might survive a day physically, you might survive a week by mimicking those around you, but deep within, something human would begin to rot, that gentle, vulnerable part of you that makes life not just bearable, but beautiful. And in time, if you stayed long enough, you'd either lose that part forever, or it would destroy you from the inside. Because the ultimate tragedy of Sparta isn't just that it demanded physical toughness, it's that it demanded spiritual submission. Total conformity, and emotional starvation in service of a single goal, war. And no modern soul, raised in a world of freedom and feeling, could survive long in a place where even love had to wear armor. And so, in the quiet moments, if you were ever lucky or cursed enough to find one, when the clang of swords paused, when the drilling footsteps stopped, when the grunts and commands faded into the wind, you might find yourself staring at the horizon, wondering if this relentless pursuit of strength was truly strength at all. Because what is strength, really? Is it the absence of pain, or the ability to feel it without breaking? Is it never showing fear, or having the courage to admit it and keep moving anyway? Sparta answered that question in one way, with walls of silence, fists of discipline, and rivers of blood, but our hearts, today, answer it differently. We recognize that vulnerability is not weakness, that softness is not shameful, and that there is a kind of courage and empathy in listening, in refusing to become a machine. And the Spartans, for all their might, for all their legendary status in our history books, had no room for that truth. And perhaps that is why, despite their unmatched warriors and their fearsome training, Sparta did not last. Their walls were strong, yes, but their hearts were sealed shut, and no society can thrive for long when it crushes the human soul in pursuit of perfection. Their rivals, Athens for example, though flawed in their own right, embraced art, philosophy, democracy, things that outlived Sparta's swords. And that tells us something deeply profound, that what endures is not merely force, but thought, not domination, but dialogue, not discipline alone, but dreams. So no, you could not live among the Spartans for a day. Not because you are weak, but because you are alive in ways they were not allowed to be. You laugh freely. You cry openly. You question, explore, create, love. And those are not weaknesses. Those are the things that make you human. And to live as a Spartan, even for a moment, would require killing that very humanity inside you. And that is too great a price to pay, not just for a day, but for any lifetime. And when you return, even if only in your imagination, from that unforgiving land of Sparta, you feel a strange kind of gratitude, not just for the comforts of soft beds, warm meals, and gentle voices, but for the right to be unsure, to stumble, to grow at your own pace. You begin to appreciate the countless small freedoms that the Spartans were denied, the right to read a poem just because it moves you, to spend a morning walking without purpose, to say no without fear of punishment, to fall in love not out of duty but desire. And you realize that what we often romanticize about Sparta, the muscles, the marching, the discipline, is only a shell, a mask hiding a society that lived in constant fear of weakness, of collapse, of internal revolt, because beneath the armor and bronze helmets was a system so rigid it had to police every emotion, every thought, every child, just to keep from breaking apart under the weight of its own harsh ideals. You see, no one talks about the helots, the oppressed class, the enslaved majority, who fed and clothed the Spartan elite, who lived in terror of random executions by teenage Spartans sent out to kill as a test. No one romanticizes them, but they were the cost of Spartan power, and so were the lost dreams of every boy who never had the chance to sing, every girl who was praised not for her mind but for her hips, every old man who died not surrounded by family but by soldiers who saluted his discipline, not his life. Even the Spartan victories, Thermopylae, Plataea, came soaked in the blood of lives lived in tension, under a code that had no room for personal truth. So when we imagine ourselves among Spartans, we must ask not just, could I survive? But, should I want to? Because to live even one day there would mean silencing everything modern you hold dear, your laughter, your tears, your hesitation, your imagination, your love of peace and beauty. And no story, no statue, no legend is worth trading your soul for a sword. And perhaps that is the greatest lesson Sparta offers us, not how to fight, but how not to forget what makes life worth living, because in admiring their courage, we must not inherit their coldness, and in studying their strength, we must not sacrifice our softness. It is tempting, especially in a world that often feels chaotic and weak, to fantasize about rigid order, about discipline that crushes doubt and fear. But such fantasies come at the expense of our very humanness. The Spartans didn't fail because they weren't strong. They failed because they didn't bend, didn't adapt, didn't evolve. Their society was a sword held too tightly for too long, and in time, even the sharpest steel breaks. And so, when you next see them in a film, in a meme, in a fitness ad, these bronzed, shouting warriors with shields high and eyes full of fire, remember what it took to make them that way. The erased feelings, the silenced voices, the rigid bodies masking brittle souls. And now, return to yourself, here, in this century, in this life you are lucky to lead, where you can question, where you can cry, where you can forgive yourself for being tired, for not being perfect, for needing rest instead of more fight. And know this, the truest strength is not in the scream, but in the whisper that says, I will keep going, not because I was trained to obey, but because I choose to continue, with love, with kindness, and with the quiet power of a free spirit. Because that's what Sparta never gave its people. And that is what you must never give up. And even now, long after the imagined dust of Sparta has settled from your thoughts, long after your body relaxes back into modern comfort, your fingers tracing the smooth glass of a phone screen, your feet cushioned in socks, your ears filled not with war chants but with music of your choosing. There remains a trace of that place, a cold breath at the back of your mind, whispering what could have been had you been born in a world where you did not belong to yourself. And it makes you grateful, deeply and perhaps for the first time, for the fragile, flawed, beautiful world we inhabit. A world where rebellion can be quiet and gentle, where power can look like softness, where greatness is not only measured by how many you conquer but how many you comfort. You begin to see that freedom isn't just about doing what you want. It's about feeling what you feel without fear of being cast out or punished for it. And suddenly, even your worst days seem less heavy when compared to a life where emotions were shackled like criminals and curiosity was a threat to order. You don't forget Sparta. No, it stays with you, not as a place of glory but as a caution, a mirror held up to the parts of ourselves that long for control, for simplicity, for sharpness. And in that mirror, you see what we must guard against even now, in the modern age. The quiet voice that says, "Be hard, not kind, obey, don't think, endure, don't feel." And so you walk forward, not with a spear, but with awareness, not in armor, but with openness. And you tell the next person who idolizes Sparta not to dismiss its legend, but to understand its cost. Because the day you truly survive Sparta is the day you've already lost yourself. And perhaps, in the end, the reason you couldn't last even a day among the Spartans isn't because your body is too soft or your will too fragile, but because your soul is too alive. Because unlike them, you have tasted what it means to be free in thought, free in feeling, free in failure and rebirth. And once you've known that kind of freedom, no chain of discipline, no anthem of duty, no brotherhood of steel can make you forget it. The world you live in may not be perfect. It's loud, it's distracted, it's fractured. But it is yours, not because it demands your obedience, but because it invites your voice. And so you stand here, in your time, with your scars and softness, not ashamed of what Sparta might call weakness, but proud that you can weep without hiding, laugh without permission, ask without fear, love without rules, and live a life that does not demand you die for someone else's vision of greatness. That is your inheritance, not the spear or the shield, but the right to choose, and it is more powerful than any phalanx ever formed. So carry that with you, always, not as armor, but as light. And remember, to be human is not to conquer, it is to feel, and to still choose peace. And as you walk on, past the monuments carved in marble and the stories etched in stone, you begin to understand something else, something the Spartans, for all their glory, could never teach you. That strength does not always march in formation. Sometimes it stumbles in the dark and still gets up again. Sometimes it says, "I don't know," and keeps listening. Sometimes it sits in silence beside another aching soul and does not try to fix them, only stays. That is the strength you've found, not the kind sung in war songs, but the quiet kind that outlives them. And in your chest, where others might wish for fire or steel, there is something gentler, but no less enduring. There is tenderness. There is wonder. There is space. And so you build not a kingdom, but a garden, in the cracks of your days, between the noise, beneath the ruins of what others told you a life must be. You plant the seeds of questions, of care, of joy that does not require permission. You gather people, not into ranks, but into circles. You don't drill them, you listen to them. You don't command them, you trust them. And they come to you, not to follow, but to be with, to share the weight and the wildness of being alive. Because the world you are making, slowly, gently, honestly, is not won by force. It is made in the way you hold a child when they cry, in the way you let yourself laugh, even after loss, in the way you walk away from what breaks you, even if it's what others admire. And one day, maybe not soon, someone will stand where you once stood, where you thought you had failed, and they will see not the ashes of a forgotten empire, but the soft bloom of a different courage. The kind that does not need to shout. The kind that simply is. So no, you are not Spartan. You are something else. Something freer. Something fuller. Something more whole. And that, in the end, is the quiet revolution, not to become who they wanted, but to become fully, unapologetically yourself. And to leave behind not conquest, but compassion. Not legend, but love. And maybe one day, as you sit beneath a sky not marked by the cries of war, but by the slow drift of clouds and the songs of birds too small to be noticed by history, you will smile. Not because everything made sense, not because you won, not because your name will echo through marble halls, but because you lived, truly lived, in a world that tried to teach you fear and silence and obedience. And instead you answered with presence, with softness, with questions that no sword could silence and no uniform could contain. And you will look around at the ones sitting beside you, not as soldiers but as souls, not as competitors but companions. And you will know that this life, imperfect and uncertain and filled with the ache of being human, is a better testament than any monument carved in your honor, because you did not carve stone, you carved space. Space for kindness, space for difference. Space for those who have been told they were too much or not enough, and you filled that. Space not with commands, but with stories, laughter, silence, forgiveness, and all the fragile, fierce pieces of being real. And maybe, just maybe, that is the greatest strength of all, not to conquer death, but to meet life unarmored and unashamed, not to be remembered by the world, but to be remembered by someone, somewhere, as the person who made it a little easier to breathe. And so you go on, not with banners raised or drums in your step, but with the soft, steady rhythm of breath, your own, unmeasured, unregulated, unbroken by cadence or command. And you walk not toward a destination marked on a map, but towards something quieter, something harder to name, something that lives in the space between moments, between the expectations others had for you and the truth you are slowly, lovingly uncovering for yourself. And as you move forward, sometimes quickly, sometimes slowly, sometimes not at all, you begin to realize that the path you are on is not a road others built before you, paved with doctrine or legacy, or the tired songs of glory. It is a trail you make by choosing softness over spectacle, by choosing honesty over tradition, by choosing the trembling courage of being yourself over the empty confidence of becoming what others needed you to be. And it hurts sometimes, doesn't it? This kind of living, this kind of open, quiet resistance to the noise of the world. because it means carrying your own uncertainty, your own grief, your own longings that don't fit neatly into stories about conquest or greatness or destiny. But still, you carry them, and still, you keep going, not because someone ordered you to, but because something in you, something ancient and bright and unruined, believes that it matters, that you matter. Not in the way medals matter or titles or monuments, but in the way that light matters to a darkened room, or kindness matters to a life that has known only cruelty. And you begin to see that maybe the most radical thing you can do in a world that trains people to be tools is to be human, unshaped, unwieldy, unpolished, beautifully real, and not to seek perfection, but to stay tender even when it would be easier to harden, to stay curious even when it would be safer to obey, to keep reaching, even with trembling hands, toward connection, toward understanding, toward love that does not demand you shrink. And you find, in time, that this love is not soft in the way the world uses that word to mean less than or naive. No, this love is fierce in its refusal to dominate. This love is powerful in its patience. This love is unbreakable because it bends, because it knows how to fall and rise and fall again without losing itself. And you, too, are learning how to do that. To fall without shame, to rise without apology. To name your own wounds without asking for permission, to say, this hurts, and not fear being seen as weak, to say, this matters to me, even when others scoff, because your truth is not a weapon, and it never needed to be. It is a song, quiet perhaps, but lasting. And it echoes in the lives you touch, in the pauses you create, in the silence you hold so someone else's pain can breathe. And in this, you begin to build not an empire, but a home, not with walls, but with welcome, not with rules, but with reverence. Reverence for the strange, fleeting, wondrous thing it is to be a person in this world. Feeling everything and knowing so little, hurting and healing and breaking and blooming. And you do not need to win at life. You only need to live it, fully, honestly, gently. And yes, the world will still be loud, still be cruel, still be absurd. But you will not let it unmake you, not anymore, not again. Because now you know that even if your softness is mocked, even if your way of being does not fit into spreadsheets or rank systems or power structures, there is a place for it, a sacred place, growing in the cracks. And maybe no one will ever give you a medal for staying kind when bitterness would have been easier. Maybe no anthem will be written for the way you forgave yourself when you could have carried shame. Maybe no textbook will cite the way you listened instead of arguing, or how you chose to walk away instead of winning. But there are lives that will be different because of it. There are hearts that will breathe easier because you were here. And you begin to understand that legacy is not always loud, not always linear. Sometimes it is the quiet hand on a shoulder, the soft yes to a question asked in fear, the whispered, "You're not alone," in the middle of someone's storm. And maybe your greatness is not something you climb toward, but something that grows within you, slowly, like a tree that no one planted but that still found its way to the sun, and you begin to trust it, even when the old voices return, the ones that tell you to be more efficient, more stoic, more successful, and you meet them not with war, but with stillness, with breath, with the firm, quiet knowing that you have chosen a different way, and it is not lesser. It is not weaker. It is just not theirs. And that is enough, more than enough. And you stop waiting for someone to validate your path. You stop explaining yourself to people who only listen to reply. And you start tending to your own garden, the one filled with questions and contradictions and messy growth. And you let it be beautiful in its wildness, not because someone told you it was, but because you see it now, clearly, lovingly, as something worthy of tending, worthy of time, worthy of being seen. And maybe one day, when someone much younger sits beside you, confused, aching, unsure of who they are in a world that wants them to fit or fight or flee, you will tell them not what to do, but who you've become, and you will tell them the truth, that being human is not a straight line or a single answer, but a dance of falling and rising and choosing again, and again, and again, to return, to yourself, to others, to the sacred and difficult work of being here, fully as you are. Not despite the struggle, but because of it. And you will tell them that they don't need to be strong in the way stories taught them, that their tears are not a weakness, that their confusion is not a failure, that their softness is not a flaw. It is a doorway. And they will listen, perhaps, or perhaps not. But either way, you will speak, and in doing so, you will carry forward the quiet revolution of gentleness, of truth, of choosing to feel rather than numb, to connect rather than control, to live rather than perform. And in that, you will have given them more than advice. You will have given them permission to be human in all its messy, sacred, unfinished beauty. And perhaps what matters now, more than ever, is not whether the world understands you, not whether your path is praised or even noticed, but whether you can keep walking it with your eyes open, your heart tender, and your soul unshackled, because there will always be voices, loud, assured, certain, that try to tell you what a meaningful life must look like, that draw lines around truth and success and worth as if such things could ever be contained, ever be measured in numbers or achievements or legacies left behind in ledgers and laws. But you who have chosen to live in the quiet courage of feeling, you know that worth is not found in applause or outcomes but in intention, in presence, in the simple but staggering decision to show up honestly, again and again, even when it hurts, even when it's thankless, even when no one is watching, and especially when they are. And you know now that greatness is not a peak to be reached but a depth to be discovered, not outside, but within, and it will never be granted by someone else, because it is not theirs to give, only yours to recognize, and maybe you were never meant to fit into the stories others wrote. Stories built around conquest and comparison and the illusion of control. Maybe your story was always going to be more difficult to tell, more nuanced, less cinematic but infinitely more true, and maybe that's why you felt out of place. Not because you were lacking, but because the room was too small. For the size of your soul, for the range of your feeling, for the gravity of your questions, and now, with time and scars and soft revolutions layered into the folds of your being, you begin to understand that this life, this complex, aching, exquisite life, will not be made easier by pretending, by conforming, by silencing the parts of you that shake or sing, but it will become more real, more alive, more yours. When you stop trying to be who you were supposed to be and instead stand fully in who you are, not as an act of defiance but as an act of remembering that you were never broken, only buried, never weak, only waiting, never lost, only searching for a language that could hold your truth without turning it into performance. And now that you are learning that language, slowly, painfully, beautifully, you begin to speak, not always fluently, not always boldly, but honestly. And that honesty becomes a kind of shelter, not just for you but for others too, others who were told they were too emotional or too sensitive or too slow or too much. And you become, without trying, a lighthouse, not because you have all the answers, but because you no longer pretend to. And that kind of authenticity, that kind of rooted vulnerability, is a light in itself, a quiet beacon that says, you are not alone. In a world that thrives on disconnection, and the more you lean into that, the more you offer presence instead of performance, the more you become a place where people can exhale, and you realize that maybe that's all any of us ever wanted. Not to be fixed, not to be saved, not to be celebrated, just to be seen, truly seen, in the full complexity of our longing and fear and joy and grief and silliness and shame and wonder. And if you can offer that to someone, not a solution, not a sermon, just space, then maybe that is the quiet miracle of being alive. And maybe that is enough, more than enough, because it means you are not only surviving, but connecting. And through that connection, healing, and through that healing, remembering that you are not a machine to be optimized but a being to be felt, to be witnessed, to be experienced, and slowly, maybe without even noticing, you begin to feel lighter, not because your burdens are gone, but because you are no longer carrying them alone. And that, too, is strength, the kind that does not parade itself but sustains, that does not dominate but endures, that does not need validation because it knows, deeply, quietly, unwaveringly, that love is not something you earn through perfection but something you give and receive through presence. And in that presence, you begin to understand time differently, not as a race but as a rhythm, not as scarcity but as unfolding. And you begin to give yourself permission to be slow, to be unsure, to be in process. Because you have nothing to prove anymore, only something to offer, your being, just as it is. And that being becomes a kind of music. The kind you can't hear in cities of noise but feel when the world goes still. And that stillness becomes a homecoming, not to some ideal self, but to the one who has always been waiting beneath the layers of should and must and try harder, the one who feels deeply, aches honestly, dreams wildly, and now lives, finally lives, in the wide open space of truth. And maybe that truth is not a destination, but a devotion, a daily act of choosing to return to yourself, to your softness, to your questions, to your unfinishedness, and to love it all not because it's impressive, but because it's real. And real is what endures, real is what touches, real is what will be remembered long after the noise has passed and the titles have faded and the battles have blurred. Because real is the only thing that ever mattered in the first place. And you, as you are, even now, especially now, are part of that realness. You are living proof that a different way is possible, not a way of dominance, but of dignity, not of spectacle, but of sincerity, not of perfection, but of presence. And if that is not worthy of honor, then perhaps we have misunderstood honor altogether. And so you walk, not toward a finish line, not toward a crown or an accolade, but simply forward, each step a quiet rebellion against everything that told you to harden, to hurry, to silence what trembles inside you. And you begin to understand that healing is not some mountain you climb and conquer once, but a winding, unfolding path you keep returning to with gentleness instead of judgment. And every time you come back to yourself, to your breath, to that soft voice within that whispers, "You're still here," you reclaim a little more of your own belonging, not because the world gave it to you, but because you stop asking for permission to exist fully. And the more you walk this way, the more you realize that strength was never in the armor but in the willingness to put it down, even if only for a moment, even if your hands shake as you do it. And maybe that is what courage actually looks like, not being unafraid, but refusing to abandon yourself even when you're terrified. And in that refusal there is something sacred, something ancient, something that has survived fire and exile and silence. Because the soul, your soul, has memory, not of facts or timelines but of essence, of what it means to be whole even while breaking, of what it means to lose yourself and still find your way back not by force, but by invitation, by listening, by allowing yourself to be more than just what the world asked you to be. And you begin to see others through that same lens, not as roles or functions or masks, but as whole constellations of longing and contradiction and hope. And you stop needing people to be strong or wise or right, and instead let them be real. And that shift, that softening, becomes a kind of freedom that cannot be undone, because once you've tasted what it means to live without the constant pressure to perform, to please, to win, you cannot go back, not really. And even if you find yourself pretending again, falling back into old rhythms, you now carry a compass within you, a quiet truth that hums when something isn't right, when you're abandoning yourself to belong. And you learn, slowly, painfully, that belonging that costs you your truth is not belonging, it's exile in disguise. And you've lived in exile long enough, haven't you? Exiled from your own softness, your own pace, your own depth. And so now, even when it feels unfamiliar, even when it feels lonely, you choose the path of return, not to who you were, but to who you've always been beneath the layers of becoming. And that return, that remembering, is not dramatic, it is not loud, it is not a banner you wave. It is quiet, like breath, like the slow shift of seasons, like the tide that always knows how to come home. And you begin to trust that rhythm, not because it always feels good, but because it always brings you back to what matters, not the image, but the essence, not the story others tell about you, but the truth you carry in your bones. And your bones, old as stars, do not lie. They hold everything, every grief, every tenderness, every moment you dared to keep your heart open when it would have been easier to close. And that is what makes you radiant, not the polish, but the presence. The ache, the quiet decision to feel when the world offered you numbness, the decision to stay human when it would have been easier to shut it all down. And maybe no one will ever give you a medal for that, but it is still holy, it is still meaningful, it is still enough. And you begin to see that you were never chasing greatness. Not really. You were searching for a place to be unguarded, a space to be held without being handled. A home where your light didn't need to be earned and your shadow didn't need to be hidden. And maybe that home isn't a place or a person, but a way of being, your own being, met with kindness, met with patience, met with breath. And now you are learning how to create that home for yourself, in yourself, again and again. And the more you do, the more you realize that love is not something far away waiting to be found. It is something you give to the parts of yourself you were taught to neglect, to judge, to exile, and that love, slow, messy, unconditional, changes everything, because it tells the frightened child inside you that they are no longer alone, no longer in danger, no longer needing to fight for a place at the table. And in that release, you begin to soften, and in that softening, you begin to expand, and in that expansion, you begin to feel not just your own pain, but the collective ache of others who, like you, were told to shrink, to quiet down, to become acceptable. And you realize that your healing is not just yours. It is a ripple, a rebellion, a revolution of tenderness in a world that worships efficiency and polish and power. And maybe your greatest act of resistance is not in how loudly you speak, but in how deeply you listen. To yourself, to others, to the spaces in between. Because in those spaces, real connection is born. And that connection is what keeps us alive, even when everything else tries to tear us apart. And maybe that's why you're still here, still breathing, still reaching. Not because you've never been broken, but because you chose again and again to put the pieces back with gold, with grace, with care. And now you carry your cracks like constellations, proof that you are not fragile, but forged, not unscarred, but sacred. And you will keep walking this path, not because you know where it ends, but because you trust where it begins, in truth, in breath, in the gentle, holy act of being who you are, without apology, without shame, without the need to prove that you are worthy of love, because you already are, you always have been. And nothing, no Spartan code, no ancient mold, no modern machine, can take that away from you again. And maybe what you're beginning to understand, in this slow and sacred unraveling, is that the life you thought you were supposed to live, the one filled with certainties and steps and expectations and polished certitudes, was never truly yours to begin with. It was borrowed, assembled, inherited like armor from those who feared softness, passed down like a script written by hands too tired to imagine anything gentler, and so you wore it. Because that's what you were taught to do, to fit, to function, to follow. But the longer you lived in that shape, the more your bones ached from the tension of holding yourself so tightly in a mold that was never carved for you. And now, in this breath, in this pause between who you were and who you are becoming, you are starting to see the cracks not as failures but as invitations, not as reasons to recoil but as gentle doors opening to something deeper, something more real. And it's terrifying, isn't it? To let go of the story that made you feel safe even if it was suffocating. To stop chasing the approval that you once mistook for love. To untangle yourself from the myth that says value is earned through sacrifice and silence and self-erasure. But oh, how brave you are, not in the way that movies tell us to be brave, not in the way of triumph and trumpets, but in the quiet, aching courage of sitting with yourself honestly, of facing the parts of you that have long been hidden in shadows and saying gently, "You belong here too." And maybe that's the revolution the world has been waiting for, not the conquering of others, but the reconciliation within. The kind that does not seek to dominate or defeat, but to understand, to witness, to hold with tenderness the complexity of being alive in a world that demands performance when your soul longs for presence. And now you are learning, slowly, painfully, beautifully. That you can carry contradiction without needing to resolve it. You can hold joy and grief in the same palm without needing one to cancel the other. And in that spaciousness, you are rediscovering yourself not as a fixed point but as a landscape, ever shifting, ever becoming. And that is not weakness. That is not flakiness or indecision. That is aliveness. That is the pulse of real humanity. And yes, it's messy, it's inconvenient. It doesn't fit neatly on a resume or a timeline or a dinner party answer. But it is honest, and maybe honesty is the most sacred thing we have left in a world that sells illusions. And maybe that's why your softness feels so threatening to those who have not yet touched their own. Because to feel fully is to be ungovernable by fear, to be sovereign in a world of systems. And when you choose presence over performance, connection over control, breath over burnout, you are choosing a life that cannot be monetized, cannot be measured by outputs and metrics and praise. And that is the most radical act of all, to be a person. A full person, not a product. And maybe this journey you're on isn't about arriving anywhere, but about learning to sit in your own skin without flinching, to listen to the sound of your own breath without judgment, to look in the mirror and meet your own eyes without shame. And that is not small work. That is sacred. That is reclamation. That is the quiet kind of love that changes everything. And the more you do this, the more you soften not just toward yourself but toward others, because you realize that everyone is carrying something. Everyone is unraveling in some way. And the more you see your own humanity, the more clearly you see theirs. And judgment falls away, replaced by compassion. Not the kind that pities from a distance, but the kind that sits close and listens, even when there are no words. And maybe that is what healing really is, not fixing, not forcing, but allowing. Allowing pain to speak, allowing joy to rise, allowing silence to stretch without needing to fill it with noise. And in that allowing, in that holy space of simply being, you find a kind of peace that does not depend on circumstances. A stillness that does not need external permission to exist, and you begin to understand that your life does not have to be impressive to be meaningful, does not have to be extraordinary to be worthy, and the pressure to matter, to prove, to be unforgettable. That too begins to loosen its grip, because you realize that existing fully, even quietly, is enough, that being here, awake and feeling, is already a miracle, and that your presence, your attention, your care, these are the gifts you bring to the world, not the titles, not the trophies, not the performance. And maybe that's why you've always felt a little out of place. Because you were never meant to be a machine, you were meant to be a garden. And gardens don't rush, they don't hustle, they don't compete. They grow, they rest, they receive, and they offer their beauty without asking if it's good enough. And so you learn to grow like that too, without apology, without needing to explain your timing, without shrinking to fit the narrow lanes others carved for themselves. And the more you live this way, the more you find others who are learning the same, and together you create something new, not a utopia, not a perfect world, but a circle of presence, a web of truth, a space where it is safe to show up in the raw, in the real, in the unpolished. And from there, from that soil, something tender and powerful grows, not empire, but intimacy, not dominance, but dignity. And you see now that this was always the deeper work. Not to build monuments to your name, but to make space for others to breathe more freely, and so you continue, one breath at a time, one moment at a time, not because you have it all figured out, but because you're willing to stay, to remain, to return to your heart over and over again. And that returning, it's everything, it's the whole path, it's the map home, not to who you think you should be, but to who you already are when you stop trying so hard to be more. And in that surrender, in that release, you find your greatest strength. Not the kind that clenches its fists, but the kind that opens its hands and says, "This is me, trembling and true." And perhaps that is what the world needs now. Not more perfection, but more permission to be real, to be whole, to be deeply, unapologetically human. And you begin to notice something subtle but profound, that the more you let go of the need to be extraordinary, the more you make space for the ordinary to become sacred, for the smallest gestures to carry weight, for the briefest moments to shimmer with a kind of quiet divinity that doesn't scream for attention but simply exists. Like dew on morning grass, or a stranger's kindness, or the feeling of sunlight warming your back while you wait for nothing in particular, and you start to understand that maybe this is where life actually happens, not in the grand climaxes or the dramatic pivots, but in the middle spaces, the in-betweens, the pauses, the exhalations, the silent acknowledgments between two people who don't need to say much to be seen. And this realization doesn't come all at once. It's not a lightning strike, it's more like water wearing down stone, slow, persistent, patient. And at first you resist it, because you've been trained to look for fireworks, to measure worth in applause, to assume that something must be big and loud to matter. But then you start to feel it, that subtle thrum in your chest when you're doing nothing and yet feel completely alive, that stillness that fills your body when you stop performing, when you stop needing to be anyone else and just let yourself exist, without improvement, without utility, without needing to justify your presence. And that's when it really hits you. How much of your life was built around proving? How much energy you've spent trying to earn love, trying to earn rest, trying to earn the very things that should never have had a price tag. And it's heartbreaking, yes, to see all the ways you abandoned yourself in the name of being accepted. All the ways you punish yourself for being tender in a world that reveres hardness. All the times you mistook silence for strength and overfunctioning for value. But it's also liberating, because now you see the illusion for what it is. Not a truth, but a system, not destiny, but design. And if it was designed, then it can be unlearned, it can be dismantled. And in its place you can build something slower, kinder, more honest, something that doesn't demand perfection but welcomes presence, something that doesn't measure worth by productivity but by the depth of your breath, the steadiness of your gaze, the sincerity of your listening. And so you begin, not with declarations or resolutions, but with small choices. With the moment you let yourself cry without apology, with the moment you cancel a plan because your body is too tired to pretend, with the moment you say no without explaining. And these moments, though quiet, are seismic, because they shift the axis of your life back toward yourself, not in selfishness, but in sovereignty. And you realize how radical it is to choose yourself in a world that teaches you to disappear for the comfort of others, how holy it is to become your own sanctuary. Not because you have all the answers, but because you are finally willing to Ask the questions that matter, and the questions aren't neat. They don't have easy resolutions. They're messy, they're layered, they contradict themselves. But they are yours, and that ownership, that reclamation, is the beginning of something sacred, and slowly, almost imperceptibly, the way you move through the world changes, not in spectacle, but in texture, in quality, in intention. And you start noticing the humanity in others more easily, because you're not rushing past them in the name of progress. And you begin to see pain not as something to fix, but as something to sit with, to hold, to honor, and joy not as something you must deserve, but as something you are already worthy of, simply because you exist. And this way of being, it's not a trend, it's not a quick fix, it's not something to optimize, it's a lifelong practice, a deep remembering. And some days you'll forget, you'll fall back into old patterns. You'll believe the voice that says you're too much or not enough. And that's okay, because now you know how to return. Now you know that your worth is not a task to be completed but a truth to be lived. And that every time you come back to yourself, gently, lovingly, without punishment, you rewrite the story. You shift the inheritance, not just for yourself, but for everyone who's ever been told they must shrink to be loved. And this is where it becomes bigger than you, not in ego, but in empathy. Because the more you accept your own humanity, the more you create space for others to do the same. And that's how the world begins to heal, not through force or conquest, but through the ripple of people who choose presence over perfection, who choose truth over performance, who choose connection over conquest. And the beauty of it is that it doesn't require permission, it doesn't need an institution, it doesn't wait for approval. It begins now, in this breath, in this moment, in this choice to be here, fully, bravely, and maybe that's all you've ever really needed. Not to be better, not to be fixed, not to be remade, but to be met, as you are, with kindness, and to learn how to meet yourself that way too. And in that meeting, in that gaze that says, I see you and you're already enough, something ancient softens, something sacred returns, and you are no longer running, no longer grasping, you are simply here. And here is enough, and maybe it always has been. And you begin to feel a strange kind of stillness settle into your bones, not the kind of stillness that comes from being idle or numb, but the kind that arises when you stop trying to outrun yourself, when you finally decide that maybe you don't have to be more than you are to be worthy of love. And that maybe, just maybe, there was never anything wrong with you in the first place, just layers upon layers of noise, expectations, projections, fears that weren't even yours. And as they fall away, one by one, like leaves in autumn, you're left not empty, but bare, raw, and surprisingly whole. And it's a terrifying kind of wholeness. Because now you're no longer hidden behind the illusion of potential or the mask of self-improvement. Now you are simply you, not the idea of you, not the performance of you, not the polished version you thought you had to be. And it's humbling, how much tenderness that takes, how much courage it requires to say, I'm here, this is me, not perfect, not finished, not always strong, but honest. And in that honesty you begin to see everything differently. Not because the world changed, but because you did. Because now you're seeing with your own eyes instead of through someone else's lens. And maybe that's what growing up really is, not becoming something new, but remembering what you were before the world convinced you to be something else. And it's not easy, no. It breaks you in ways you didn't expect. It asks you to grieve the versions of yourself you wore like armor, to mourn the identities that protected you even as they caged you. And sometimes you'll miss them, those masks, those sharp edges, because they gave you structure, they gave you rules, they gave you a way to survive. But you're not here to survive anymore, you're here to live, to feel, to soften, to risk being hurt in order to taste real intimacy, to risk being wrong in order to learn something true. And that shift, from defense to openness, it changes everything. The way you speak, the way you walk into a room, the way you listen to others without preparing your reply, the way you let people in not because they've earned it, but because you've stopped guarding your worth like a secret. And somewhere in all of that, you begin to forgive yourself. Not just for the things you did when you didn't know better, but for all the times you tried to disappear to make others comfortable, for all the moments you silenced your joy to avoid envy, for all the ways you abandoned your needs because you thought self-sacrifice was the price of being loved. And forgiveness, real forgiveness, isn't neat. It doesn't come in a wave of relief. It's messy, it stings, it arrives in fragments. And sometimes it feels like weakness, like giving up, but it's not. It's the opposite. It's the moment you say, I don't have to keep punishing myself for the ways I learned to cope. And in that softness you discover something you never expected. Power, not the loud kind, not the kind that dominates or persuades, but the quiet kind, the kind that says, I am here, I exist, I matter, and I don't need to prove it. And the world may not know what to do with that kind of power, because it can't be sold or replicated or commodified, but it is yours, and it is real. And as you begin to inhabit that power, something in you steadies, not perfectly, not forever, but enough to stop bracing for rejection every time you speak your truth. Enough to stop apologizing for the space you take up. Enough to stop asking for permission to be who you are. And that's when the fear starts to loosen its grip. Not because it vanishes, but because it no longer leads. It no longer drives the choices you make. And instead, something else begins to lead. Curiosity. Maybe, or compassion. Or that tiny voice inside you that always knew there was more to life than fitting in. And you start to follow that voice, even when it whispers instead of shouts, even when it leads you away from what's comfortable. And every step you take in that direction is a reclamation, a return, a remembering. And soon, you begin to recognize yourself not as a project, but as a person, layered, luminous, flawed, complete, and you start to trust your rhythms again, your hungers, your instincts, not because they're always right, but because they're yours, and you're finally learning how to listen, not just with your ears, but with your whole being. And listening like that changes everything, because now you hear the world not as a place to conquer, but as a place to connect. With others, yes, but also with yourself. With the quiet parts you used to ignore. With the child inside you who still wants to dance without judgment. With the part of you that still believes in beauty, in softness, in something sacred woven through the chaos of living. And you begin to notice that the more you honor those parts, the more the world seems to open up. Not always kindly, but more honestly. Because people can feel when you're present, when you're not. Pretending, and presence, real presence, is magnetic, it's disarming, It invites others to show up too. And maybe that's the hidden gift of all your unraveling, that you're no longer trying to impress, you're trying to connect. And connection is the one thing this world needs more than anything. Not efficiency, not certainty, not more answers, just real, unguarded connection. And it starts with you, not because you're perfect, but because you're willing, because you're here, because you still believe that there's something sacred in simply being alive together, even when it's messy, especially when it's messy. And that belief, that hope, it's not naive, it's revolutionary, because it says, I choose to feel, I choose to care, I choose to be human in a world that tells me to be more, to be harder, to be something else. And the more you choose that, the more you become someone the world didn't know it needed, not a savior, not a leader, not a brand. Just someone who's awake, someone who's listening, someone who's not afraid to say, I don't know, but I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere. And maybe that's all any of us really need, to be here, together, not solving everything, not fixing each other, but holding space, holding truth, holding one another with open hands and open hearts. And in that holding, in that sacred, trembling presence, maybe we find our way home, not back to what was, but forward to what could be, if only we dare to keep feeling, to keep softening, to keep choosing love, not as a feeling, but as a way of being. And perhaps that's the quiet revolution you've been unknowingly part of all along. Not the kind that demands banners or blood or thunderous applause, but the kind that begins in the way you choose to treat yourself on a tired morning, in the way you look at someone you love when they're failing and choose presence over fixing, in the way you forgive the past not because it deserves it, but because you no longer want to carry its weight like a wound across every new day. And this revolution, your revolution, it doesn't care for spectacle. It blooms in silence, in slow truths, in the decision to speak gently when you could speak cleverly, to pause instead of prove, to witness instead of win. And maybe that's what healing is, not the sudden mending of everything that ever hurt, but the slow, persistent return to trust. Trust in your own breath, your own timing, your own ability to hold space for pain without becoming it. And somewhere along that path you notice that you've stopped chasing what used to seem so urgent, perfection, recognition, control, not because they no longer seduce you, but because you've touched something more real, something quieter, something like peace. And peace isn't the absence of chaos. It's the willingness to stop running from it, to sit with it, even invite it to tea, and listen to what it's trying to teach you. And when you do, you start to realize that so many of your battles weren't against the world, but against your own fear of not being enough. And now you know, you are not a problem to be solved, you are a person to be held. And when you begin to hold yourself like that, not with judgment, but with reverence, the world changes subtly, but profoundly, because now you no longer need to demand belonging, you carry it, quietly, in the way you move through space, in the way you meet another's eyes without needing to impress or explain. And that kind of presence, that kind of belonging, it can't be faked, and it can't be taken away, because it's rooted not in approval but in truth, and truth, once you've let it live in you, will not be quieted again. It will rise in your voice when you speak of love. It will steady your hand when you offer help. It will soften your heart when you are tempted to close it. And this is the paradox of it all. The more you root into your truth, the more you realize that everyone else is just trying to be seen, to be safe, to be loved, and suddenly, the world becomes less of a battlefield and more of a classroom, or maybe a sanctuary, where every moment is an invitation to remember your humanity, to practice grace, to extend the same kindness to others that you're learning to give yourself, and you won't always get it right. You'll snap, you'll hide, you'll regress. But even then, you'll see it sooner, you'll recover faster, not because you've mastered yourself, but because you've stopped abandoning yourself. And that, more than any grand achievement, is what changes your life. Not the absence of pain, but the presence of self-compassion within it. And when you begin to move from that place, even the mundane feels sacred, the way sunlight hits your kitchen counter, the way your friend's voice cracks when they laugh, the way your own tears come in waves when you least expect it, and you don't push them away this time, because now you understand. Feeling is not a weakness, it's a compass, and your vulnerability is not something to be hidden but honored, because it means you're still alive, still open, still willing to be moved, and to live like that. Eyes open, heart soft. It is the greatest risk and the greatest reward, and yes, it will cost you certainty, armor, illusion, but in return it will give you everything you secretly longed for but were too afraid to name: depth, intimacy, presence, and above all, peace, not the sterile peace of avoidance, but the alive peace of participation, the kind that says, I am in this life fully, not as a spectator, but as a soul who dares to care. And when you live from that place, you stop asking, what do I deserve? And start asking, what do I choose to give? Not to be noble, but to be real, because you've seen now. We're all carrying something. We're all trying to matter, we're all longing for touch. And maybe the kindest thing you'll ever do is refuse to see yourself as separate from that, is to lean into the shared ache and say, I'm here too, I feel it too, and I still choose love, not the soft focus fantasy kind, but the kind that listens even when it's tired, that stays even when it's awkward, that forgives even when it doesn't forget. Because it knows that connection is worth it. Because it remembers that we don't heal in isolation. We heal in community. We heal when someone says, me too. We heal when someone stays, not to fix us, but simply to witness us, to hold space for our becoming. And if you can do that, even once, for someone else, or for yourself, you've already done something holy, and that holiness isn't found in perfection. It's found in persistence, in the willingness to keep showing up when it would be easier to numb out, to keep offering warmth when the world goes cold. And it doesn't mean you never rest. It means you rest honestly, not as escape but as return, not to hide, but to come back to what matters. And what matters, it's not the accolades or the image or the speed of your success. It's the quiet courage of choosing to stay awake in your own life, of choosing to meet yourself where you are, again and again and again, with gentleness instead of shame, with curiosity instead of control. And if you do that, even imperfectly, you begin to walk through the world differently. Not above it, but within it, not better than others, but deeply with them. And that's where everything softens, that's where your breath gets deeper, your voice steadier, your presence fuller, and the world, it starts to respond in kind, not always kindly, but with recognition, because when you are true, the world feels it. And it may not reward you in the ways you expected, not with applause, not with ease, but it will give you something far greater: resonance, aliveness, meaning that cannot be manufactured. And that is the gift you carry forward now, not as a weapon, but as a flame, not to burn down what was, but to light the way for what could be. And you'll stumble, yes, and you'll doubt, and you'll wonder if you've lost your way. But then you'll remember, this path is not straight, it is not tidy, it is not marked by milestones but by moments of remembering who you are and why you began. And in those moments, even when they're fleeting, even when they're quiet, you'll know you are not lost, you are being remade, not into someone new, but into someone true, and that is enough. And maybe the most radical thing you can do in a world obsessed with velocity and volume is to go slow, to be quiet, to live deliberately not out of fear but out of reverence for what you're touching. The mornings that arrive like open palms, the conversations that unfold without agenda, the small, unremarkable gestures of care that carry more weight than any proclamation of love ever could. And perhaps this is where meaning lives now, not in the peaks or in the narratives that others can admire from a distance, but in the space between one breath and the next, in the choice to listen before you respond, to look before you judge, to stay when everything in you wants to flee. And this kind of living, it won't always look impressive from the outside. No trophies, no headlines. But inside, where it counts, you start to notice a different kind of richness taking root, a fullness not born of having everything, but of needing less, craving less, grasping less, because you've finally let go of the illusion that you are only as worthy as you are useful, or productive, or impressive. And in that letting go, there is rest. Not the kind that comes at the end of exhaustion, but the kind that arises from wholeness, from the deep knowing that you don't need to prove yourself to be allowed to belong, that you don't need to constantly earn your place in the world through sacrifice and performance. And maybe that's the freedom that's been waiting for you all along, not the absence of responsibility, but the refusal to derive your identity solely from it, the courage to be someone beyond your roles, your output, your usefulness to others. And when that realization finally sinks in, not just into your thoughts, but into your bones, something unclenches, some long-held tension you didn't even know was there begins to release, and you begin to see yourself not as a tool, not as a product, but as a presence, breathing, feeling, evolving, and that shift, however subtle, ripples outward into everything, because when you treat yourself like you matter inherently, you stop allowing relationships that make you feel like you must shrink to fit, or apologize for your sensitivity, or wear a mask of invincibility just to be loved, and suddenly space opens. Space for boundaries, for honesty, for depth, not because you're demanding more, but because you're finally offering more to yourself. And in doing so, you create a kind of gravity that draws the right people closer, the ones who see you not as an idea or a function but as a person, whole and holy, not because you're perfect but because you're real. And they don't need you to shine constantly. They're not afraid of your shadows. They've made peace with their own. And so they can sit beside you in yours. And that is intimacy. Not just the sharing of joy, but the sharing of grief. The kind of closeness that isn't afraid to watch you fall apart and doesn't flinch when you weep from a place so deep it has no language. And it's strange how rare that is, and how simple, and how sacred. to be met where you are without being hurried through it, to be witnessed without being edited, to be held without being handled. And once you've tasted that kind of presence, you no longer have patience for anything less, not out of arrogance but out of self-respect. And maybe that's what growing up really means. Not becoming hardened or immune to life's pain, but becoming more discerning about where you pour your precious energy, learning to say no without guilt, to walk away without dramatics, to trust your gut even when no one else understands it. And that's hard, of course it is, especially if you've been taught that your worth lies in your ability to please, to accommodate, to be what others need, even at the expense of your own truth. But now you know, that kind of self-erasure is not noble, it is a slow dying, and you're done dying small deaths for the comfort of others, you're done betraying yourself for peace that never lasts, and maybe now, finally, you're ready to stop surviving and start living, not the curated version of living that looks good in stories or photos, but the messy, gritty, aching, beautiful kind where you say what you mean even if your voice trembles, where you let your heart be seen even if it's been broken, where you stand in the storm of your own becoming and say, I am not here to be impressive, I am here to be honest. And maybe that honesty, that devotion to truth, that fierce tenderness, maybe that is what the world needs most from you, not your perfection, not your hustle, but your humanity, unfiltered, unapologetic, unafraid. And in embodying that, you become a kind of invitation, not for others to copy you, but to remember themselves, to return to what is most alive and most true within them. And that is how change happens, not from the top down, not through grand speeches or systems alone, but in the quiet revolution of one person choosing to live differently, choosing to feel instead of numb, to relate instead of perform, to create instead of consume. And when enough of us do that, not all at once, but gradually, consistently, imperfectly, we start to shift the world, one moment, one conversation, one choice at a time. And so you keep going, not because it's easy, but because it's true. And in truth, there is a kind of sustenance that no convenience or distraction can provide. And yes, it will cost you. You'll lose illusions, you'll grieve identities, you'll disappoint people who preferred you quiet and compliant. But you'll gain yourself, and in doing so, you'll discover that nothing else is worth more, because once you belong to yourself, once you are rooted in your own soul, you can no longer be manipulated by the shifting tides of opinion or the shiny promises of approval. You become still, not static, but centered, and from that center you live, and you love, and you give, not to earn worth but because you are already full, and full people don't hoard, they overflow, with grace, with presence, with purpose, and that overflow is your legacy, not what you owned or accomplished or collected, but how you made people feel, safe, seen, softened, and that is more than enough. To live is to be perpetually unsettled, never quite fitting into the neat boxes others tried to shove you into, never fully contained by the expectations laid out like roads that promise safety but lead nowhere new. And perhaps the truest form of courage is not in grand gestures or heroic battles, but in the quiet rebellion of waking up every day and choosing authenticity over acceptance, choosing the vulnerable path over the path of least resistance, even when the cost is loneliness, misunderstanding, the slow erosion of comfort. for comfort is the enemy of growth, and growth is messy and often painful but also radiant. And so you find yourself walking between worlds, the one that demands you conform and the one that invites you to be more. And there is no map for this journey, no guidebook, only the trembling of your own heart to lead the way. And sometimes that trembling is so fierce it feels like a breaking, like something inside you is unraveling, but that unraveling is also unbinding. It's the shedding of old skins that no longer fit, the soft cracking open that allows new light to enter. And in those moments when you feel most fragile, remember that fragility is not weakness but a sign of being fully alive, a testament to how much you have loved, lost, dreamed, and dared. And to deny that is to deny the fullness of your own humanity. And so you learn to honor your breaks as much as your triumphs, to sit with your pain as patiently as you celebrate your joys, to carry your scars not as marks of shame but as badges of endurance. And in this sacred holding of all parts of yourself, you begin to cultivate a deep, unshakable peace, not the kind promised by endless achievement or the temporary relief of distractions, but the kind that whispers through your bones that you are enough, just as you are. And with that whisper comes a radical shift in how you move through the world, how you relate to others, and how you relate to yourself. Because when you believe you are enough, you no longer chase approval. You no longer seek validation in hollow places. You stop trying to fix what was never broken, and instead, you start to build from the inside out, nurturing the parts of you that have been neglected, feeding the dreams you've been too afraid to speak aloud, planting seeds of hope in the fertile ground of your own resilience. And in doing so, you create a life not dictated by fear or obligation, but by intention and love. And that life becomes a lighthouse, a beacon for others lost in the fog of their own doubts and fears, not because you have all the answers, but because you show up with honesty and grace. And that presence is transformative. It shifts the atmosphere around you, invites others to shed their masks, to lower their defenses, to remember what it means to be truly seen. And it is in this shared vulnerability that real connection is born, that healing begins, that communities form not from convenience or similarity, but from the raw, messy, beautiful truth of being human together. And you realize that the greatest gift you can offer the world is not your perfection or your achievements, but your presence, your willingness to be real, to be present, to be fully yourself even when it scares you. And that presence changes things. It softens hearts, it opens minds, it ignites hope. And that hope is a quiet revolution, a slow turning of the tide, a breaking down of walls built on fear and separation. And even when it feels like the world is too broken, too fast, too loud, you remember that even the smallest light can cut through the darkest night. And your light matters, not because it blinds or demands attention, but because it offers warmth and guidance, and you carry that light with humility and fierce tenderness, knowing that to hold light you must also hold shadow, that joy and sorrow are intertwined, that strength comes from embracing the full spectrum of experience. And so you live in paradox, in tension, in the beautiful contradiction of being both fragile and strong, both lost and found, both broken and whole. And in that living, you find freedom. Not the freedom to do whatever you want without consequence, but the freedom to be who you truly are, to love without pretense, to speak your truth without fear, to walk your path with open eyes and an open heart. And that freedom is the most radical act of all, a defiance of the forces that seek to diminish you, that want to silence your voice, that try to make you smaller so they can feel bigger. And in claiming your freedom, you reclaim your soul. And with your soul reclaimed, you step into the world not as a victim or a bystander, but as a creator, a healer, a force of change, not because you need to save others or be saved yourself, but because you understand that life is a shared journey, a collective unfolding, and each step you take with authenticity and courage creates ripples beyond what you can see or imagine. And so you keep walking, sometimes stumbling, sometimes soaring, always moving forward, guided by the light within. And in that moving forward, you become a testament to what it means to be fully alive, to be human in all the ways that matter most. And as the days fold into nights, and the nights bleed back into dawn, you begin to understand that life is less about the destination and more about the unfolding, less about the achievement and more about the presence, less about the armor you wear and more about the softness you dare to reveal. For it is in that softness that you find your true strength, not the strength of conquest or control, but the strength of surrender. Surrender to the messy, unpredictable flow of existence. Surrender to the fact that you cannot fix everything, that you will fail, that you will hurt, that you will be hurt. And yet, despite all that, you choose to keep going. You choose to keep opening your heart. You choose to keep trusting that beneath the chaos, beneath the noise, beneath the fracture, there is a thread of meaning, a thread of connection, a thread of love that weaves through it all. And it is this thread you learn to follow, not blindly, but with eyes wide open, with wounds exposed and hopes untamed. And this thread leads you to moments of grace, a smile from a stranger, a hand held in silence, a glance that speaks without words, a memory that catches your breath, a song that lifts your spirit. And you learn to cherish these moments, not as distractions from pain or struggle, but as reminders that even in the darkest hours, light persists, that even when you feel utterly alone, you are part of a vast, intricate web of life that holds you, supports you, witnesses you. And this realization transforms your relationship to solitude. It is no longer a place of loneliness, but a sacred space of reflection, a place where you meet yourself fully, where you learn to be your own companion, your own home, your own sanctuary. And this self-companionship becomes a revolutionary act in a world that teaches you to seek outside yourself for validation and worth. And as you cultivate this inner sanctuary, you discover layers of yourself you never knew existed. Your fears, your desires, your contradictions, your complexities. And instead of running from them, you greet them with curiosity and compassion, knowing that to deny any part of yourself is to deny your wholeness. And wholeness is not about perfection, it is about embracing every fragment of your being, the light and the dark, the joyful and the sorrowful, the certain and the uncertain. And in this embracing, you find liberation, a liberation that no external circumstance can take away, a liberation that anchors you through storms, through losses, through moments of doubt and despair. And with this liberation comes a new way of seeing the world, not as a battlefield or a competition or a marketplace of worth, but as a garden, wild and untamed, full of surprises and cycles and lessons in beauty. And you begin to walk this garden with reverence, planting seeds of kindness, watering the roots of empathy, clearing the weeds of judgment, And you realize that this tending is not a chore but a calling, a sacred work that sustains both you and the world around you. And even when your efforts seem small or invisible, you trust that they matter. That the garden grows not only in visible blooms, but in the quiet strengthening of soil and the weaving of roots beneath the surface. And this trust becomes a source of resilience, a wellspring of hope that carries you forward when the weight of despair threatens to pull you under. And in this way, you become a keeper of light, a guardian of possibility, a witness to the unfolding mystery of life. And you understand that the greatest courage is not in never falling, but in rising again and again, in showing up, in being present, in loving fiercely and tenderly even when it hurts. And this courage is contagious. It inspires others to rise, to show up, to love, and together you create a chorus of resilience, a symphony of hope, a movement of healing that reverberates far beyond what you can see. And this is the legacy you choose to leave, not monuments of stone or titles or possessions, but a trail of compassion, a testament to what it means to be fully human, to live with an open heart, to hold space for pain and joy, to be broken and whole all at once, to dance with the complexity of existence without losing your center. And in this legacy, you find your purpose, not as a fixed destination but as a dynamic, evolving path. And you walk it with humility and fierce love, knowing that every step is a gift, every breath a miracle, every encounter a chance to awaken, to connect, to heal. And so you keep walking, keep breathing, keep loving, because this is what it means to be alive, not perfect, not invincible, but real, present, and deeply connected to the pulse of the universe. And that connection is where your true power lies, a power born not of domination or control, but of surrender and acceptance, of fierce gentleness and unwavering presence. And in this power, you find freedom, the kind of freedom that no chains can bind. No voices can silence, the freedom to be exactly who you are, in all your complexity and beauty. And that freedom, fragile and fierce, tender and unyielding, is the greatest gift you can offer yourself and the world, now and always. And in this unending unfolding, you come to see that time itself is not a river flowing in one direction but a vast ocean where past, present, and future intertwine like waves crashing into one another. And the scars you carry are not merely marks of pain but gateways to wisdom, each one a story etched into your flesh and soul, a testament to survival and transformation. And sometimes you may feel overwhelmed by the weight of memories, by the shadows of choices made and paths not taken. But those shadows are not prisons, they are contours of your landscape, shaping valleys and peaks where light can gather and dance. And you learn to navigate this terrain not by erasing your history but by honoring it, by telling your story with honesty and grace, knowing that your truth is a thread that connects you to others in the shared tapestry of humanity. And in telling your story you reclaim your voice from silence and shame, and that voice, once heard, has the power to awaken others, to break cycles of fear and isolation, to sow seeds of courage and hope. And so you speak, not always loudly, sometimes in whispers or silence, but always authentically, because the world needs not another echo but a new song, your song, imperfect and beautiful, fragile and fierce. And as you sing, you realize that the act of creation, whether through words, art, action, or presence, is an act of rebellion against the forces that seek to diminish you, that try to confine you within roles and labels, that insist on neatness and certainty, and you embrace the messy, the uncertain, the uncharted, because it is there, in the wilderness of becoming, that life is richest and most alive, and to embrace this is to choose freedom over fear, presence over distraction, connection over isolation, and this choice is not a one-time decision, but a daily, moment-by-moment commitment. A practice of waking up to the fullness of your being and the world around you, and sometimes this practice feels like a sacred dance between holding on and letting go, between strength and surrender, between hope and despair, and you learn to move with these tensions not as contradictions but as the very fabric of existence, woven together in a pattern too vast to comprehend but intimate enough to hold in your hands. And in holding this complexity, you find grace. Not the absence of struggle, but the presence of meaning within it. Not a promise of ease, but a deep knowing that you are not alone, that the forces that shape you also shape the stars, that your breath is a thread in the web of life, that your heart beats in rhythm with the pulse of the cosmos. And this knowing grounds you when storms rage and shadows press close, reminding you that you are part of something greater, a story that began long before you and will continue long after you. And in this story, you have a role, not a predetermined script but a dynamic part to play. An invitation to bring your unique light to the unfolding, to be both witness and participant in the miracle of existence. And this role calls you to show up with courage and compassion, to carry your wounds alongside your dreams, to hold space for others even as you tend your own soul, to build bridges where walls have stood, to offer kindness where judgment has ruled, to create community in the face of isolation. And you accept this call not because it is easy, but because it is necessary. Because the world is hungry for healing and you have within you the power to be an instrument of that healing, not by fixing or saving, but by simply being fully present, fully human, fully awake. And this presence transforms the ordinary into the sacred, the mundane into the miraculous, the fleeting moment into eternity. And as you live this way, you become a living prayer, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, a beacon for those still searching for their way. And you understand that your life is not measured by accolades or possessions but by the depth of your love, the breadth of your kindness, the courage of your authenticity, and the persistence of your hope. And even when the path ahead is shrouded in uncertainty, you walk it with faith. Not faith in certainty or control, but faith in the unfolding itself, faith in the unseen currents that carry you forward, faith in the quiet wisdom of your own soul. And this faith becomes your anchor, your compass, your song. And in this song you find freedom. The freedom to be imperfect, to be vulnerable, to be deeply and wonderfully human. And that freedom is your gift to the world, a gift that no force can take away, a gift that, once given, multiplies and grows, lighting the way for all who come after you. And so you carry it with reverence and joy, with humility and fierce love, knowing that to live fully is the greatest act of resistance, the most profound expression of hope, the truest declaration of peace. And as you move through this life, you do so not in spite of your scars and softness, but because of them, for they are the map of your journey, the language of your soul, the very essence of what it means to be alive. And as you walk this winding path, you begin to see that the very essence of existence is not found in grand gestures or monumental achievements, but in the subtle, often overlooked moments where your heart quietly opens to the world around you. When you pause to listen to the rustle of leaves stirred by a gentle breeze, when you catch the fleeting smile of a stranger and feel a surge of unexpected connection, when you allow yourself to be fully present with another's pain without rushing to fix or explain, when you cradle your own sorrow in tenderness rather than judgment, and in these small acts of awareness and compassion you discover a profound truth, that life's meaning is woven through the fabric of ordinary moments, that presence is the most radical act of love, and that by simply being awake to the now you become a lighthouse in the fog. A beacon of light that guides not by imposing direction but by illuminating possibility. And this realization shifts your understanding of strength, not as domination or control, but as the courage to be vulnerable, to face uncertainty without retreat, to hold space for complexity without collapsing into despair, to love without conditions or guarantees. And this kind of strength is paradoxical. It is soft yet unbreakable, quiet yet powerful, gentle yet fierce. And as you embody this strength, you begin to rewrite the story you've been told about what it means to live a worthy life. You reject the notion that value must be earned through struggle or sacrifice or relentless productivity, and instead you embrace the idea that your worth is inherent, that you are enough simply because you exist. And this radical acceptance becomes a foundation from which you build a life aligned with your deepest truths and desires, a life where you no longer chase approval or validation from external sources but cultivate a deep wellspring of self-love and inner peace. And in doing so, you free yourself from the chains of comparison and competition, freeing yourself to celebrate the uniqueness of your own journey, knowing that no two paths are the same, that each soul dances to its own rhythm, and that diversity in experience is not a weakness but a vital expression of the richness of being. And as you honor your own rhythm, you also begin to honor the rhythms of others, recognizing that empathy and compassion are bridges that span the divides of difference. And in these bridges you find community, a sanctuary where you can be both seen and unseen, known and unknown, safe and challenged. And this community is not built on sameness but on mutual respect for the sacredness of each individual story. And in this sacred space you learn that healing is not a solitary journey but a collective endeavor, that your pain is not a burden to carry alone but a call to reach out and be reached, to intertwine your healing with that of others, weaving together threads of hope and resilience that form a tapestry stronger than any single strand, and this tapestry becomes a living testament to the power of connection, to the transformative potential of shared vulnerability, to the alchemy of love that turns suffering into wisdom. And through this alchemy you begin to understand that suffering is not an enemy to be vanquished but a teacher to be embraced, a guide that reveals the depths of your own capacity to endure and to grow, to break and to rebuild, to fall and to rise. And with each cycle of breaking and rebuilding, you are reborn anew, carrying forward not only the scars of the past but the wisdom born from them. And this wisdom teaches you patience for yourself and for the world, a patience that does not mean complacency or resignation but a steady, grounded presence in the face of uncertainty, a willingness to wait and watch and listen, to trust the slow unfolding of life's mysteries, to hold space for transformation that happens in its own time and way. And this patience becomes a wellspring of grace, a balm for the restless soul. A reminder that even the smallest seeds carry the promise of bloom, that beneath the harshest winters lie the roots of spring. And as you embody this grace, you become a mirror for others to see their own capacity for healing and hope. And you realize that your journey, with all its twists and turns, is a sacred thread in the vast web of life, a thread that both supports and is supported by countless others. And in this web you find belonging, not a belonging that demands conformity or sacrifice of self, but a belonging that celebrates your full, authentic presence, your imperfections and your gifts, your questions and your answers, your struggles and your triumphs. And this belonging nourishes you, strengthens you, reminds you that you are never truly alone. And as you move forward with this knowledge, you carry with you a new kind of courage, the courage to be seen fully, to risk love even when it hurts, to stand in your truth even when it shakes the ground beneath you, to live not by the dictates of fear or expectation but by the call of your own soul. And this courage is the spark that lights the way through darkness, the flame that warms the cold nights of doubt, the light that guides you home to yourself again and again. And in this homecoming you find peace, not the peace of absence or numbness, but the peace of acceptance and belonging, the peace that comes from knowing that you are enough, that your life matters, that your story is a gift to the world. And so you walk on, step by step, breath by breath, heart wide open, carrying the light of this peace like a lantern into the unknown, ready to meet whatever comes with grace and love, ready to be fully alive in this imperfect, beautiful, messy world, because this is the essence of your inheritance, the freedom to choose your path, the power to shape your story, the courage to live your truth. And this inheritance is more precious than any sword or shield, more enduring than any fortress, more transformative than any conquest. And with this truth held close, you move forward not as a warrior marching to battle, but as a seeker dancing with life, a healer weaving hope, a lover embracing the endless complexity of being human. And in this dance you find your rhythm, your song, your home. And as you continue this journey, you come to understand that freedom is not a destination but a process, an unfolding that never truly ends, because every moment invites you to choose again, whether to cling to the safety of the familiar or to step into the unknown with trembling feet and an open heart. Whether to silence the doubts and fears that whisper you are not enough or to listen to them with compassion, learning their language and letting them teach you something new about yourself. Whether to build walls that protect you from pain or to lower those walls, risking vulnerability in order to experience the fullness of connection. And in this constant dance of choice, you learn that courage is not the absence of fear but the willingness to act despite it, to keep moving forward even when the path is shrouded in mist, to keep speaking your truth even when your voice shakes, to keep loving even when your heart has been broken. And this courage is a quiet fire that burns within you, steady and unyielding, lighting your way through the darkest nights and the loneliest days. And as you nurture this fire, it grows into a beacon, not for others to follow blindly but for them to find their own light, their own strength, their own freedom. And you realize that this is the deepest gift you can offer the world, the gift of presence, the gift of authenticity, the gift of unwavering love. because in these gifts lies the power to heal wounds both old and new, to bridge divides that seem unbridgeable, to transform fear into hope, isolation into belonging, despair into joy, and this transformation begins within you, as you become a living example of what it means to be human, not perfect or invincible, but whole and vulnerable, flawed and beautiful, broken and healing. And as you embody this truth, you invite others to do the same, creating ripples of change that extend far beyond what you can see or imagine. And these ripples become waves, waves that shape the shorelines of communities, cultures, even history itself, because change does not happen only in grand gestures or sweeping revolutions, but in the quiet acts of courage and love performed by ordinary people every day. And you are one of those people, a bearer of light in the midst of darkness, a voice of hope in the noise of despair, a presence of peace in the chaos of conflict. And this role is not a burden but an honor, a calling that calls you to rise again and again, to recommit yourself to the path of growth and healing, to stand tall even when the world tries to knock you down, to keep dreaming even when reality feels harsh and unforgiving, to keep believing even when doubt threatens to consume you. And in this perseverance you find a profound joy, not a fleeting happiness, but a deep satisfaction born from living in alignment with your soul's deepest longings. And this joy is contagious, spreading like wildfire to all those you touch, igniting sparks of inspiration and courage that set others on fire with their own potential. And as you watch this unfolding, you are humbled by the mystery of life, by the interconnectedness of all beings, by the sacred dance of light and shadow that animates existence. And you bow in gratitude for the chance to be a part of this grand story, a story without end, without beginning, a story that is written anew with every breath, every step, every choice. And in this sacred act of co-creation you find meaning, not a fixed or final meaning but a living, breathing meaning that grows and changes with you, that invites you to participate fully, wholeheartedly, vulnerably. And as you participate, you come to see that the greatest gift you can give yourself and the world is the gift of presence, the gift of love, the gift of courage, the gift of being fully and unapologetically yourself. And this gift is both your birthright and your legacy, the treasure you carry through the storms and calm seas alike, the light that never dims even when clouds gather, the song that never fades even when silence falls, the flame that burns eternal within your heart. And as you nurture this flame, you understand that to be human is to be a keeper of this light, a guardian of this sacred spark, a witness to the beauty and pain of existence. And in this witnessing you find a profound peace, not the peace of resignation but the peace of acceptance, not the peace of numbness but the peace of awakening. And this awakening is your true home, the place where your soul rests and soars, where your heart breaks open and heals, where your spirit dances and sings. And in this home you are free, not free from suffering or struggle, but free to live fully in the face of them, free to love without limits, free to be the wondrous, complicated, magnificent being that you are. And as you live this freedom, you become a beacon for all those who have lost their way, a reminder that no matter how dark the night, dawn will come, that no matter how deep the wound, healing is possible, that no matter how heavy the burden, lightness can be found, that no matter how lonely the journey, connection awaits. And this is the truth you carry with you, The truth that life is a sacred gift, that your existence matters, that your story is part of the infinite mosaic of being, that you are loved beyond measure. And with this truth held close, you walk on, step by step, breath by breath, heart wide open, ready to face whatever comes with courage and grace, ready to create, to love, to heal, to grow, to live. And as you keep moving forward along this ever-unfolding path, you realize that life is not a series of isolated moments but an intricate web of experiences, each thread connected to another in ways both visible and invisible, each moment a seed from which the next grows, and in this interconnectedness you find a sense of belonging that transcends time and space. A belonging that embraces not only your own story but the stories of countless others whose lives intersect with yours in ways both subtle and profound. And as you recognize this, you begin to see your struggles and joys not as solely yours but as shared, woven into the collective fabric of human experience. And this sharedness brings comfort and strength because it means you are never truly alone, never truly separate. And in this knowing you find a new kind of courage, the courage to be vulnerable, to show your true self even when it feels risky, to reach out for help when you need it, to offer help when others are in need, to build bridges where there were once walls, to listen deeply without judgment, to speak honestly without fear, to love fiercely without reservation. And this courage transforms your relationships, turning them from transactional exchanges into soulful connections, from lonely islands into thriving communities, from competition into collaboration. And in these connections you discover that healing is not a solitary endeavor but a shared journey, a dance of give and take, a cycle of opening and receiving. And as you dance this dance, you find that your pain becomes a portal, a gateway to empathy and compassion, that your wounds become sources of wisdom and strength, that your brokenness becomes the very thing that allows you to reach others who are broken in similar ways. And in this reaching out and receiving, you experience the profound truth that to be human is to be both fragile and resilient, both limited and infinite, both a single drop and part of the vast ocean. And as you hold this paradox, you learn to move through life with grace, not by denying the hard realities but by embracing them fully, by meeting pain with courage, by meeting joy with gratitude, by meeting uncertainty with curiosity, by meeting loss with remembrance. And in this embracing, you cultivate a deep sense of peace that does not depend on external circumstances but arises from within. A peace that is not passivity but active engagement with life. A peace that is not silence but a quiet, steady presence that holds you steady even in the storm. And as you cultivate this peace, you become a source of calm and strength for those around you, a beacon of hope in times of despair, a living example of what it means to live with integrity and heart. And this example inspires others to find their own peace, their own courage, their own freedom, and together you form a circle of light that grows ever wider, illuminating the darkness, warming the coldness, breaking down barriers, building up bridges, creating a world where all beings can thrive in their unique ways, where diversity is celebrated, where differences are honored, where love is the guiding principle. And as you participate in this co-creation, you come to understand that the meaning of your life is not fixed or predetermined but something you create moment by moment, choice by choice, act by act. And this creative power is both humbling and exhilarating, because it means that you are the author of your own story, the sculptor of your own destiny, the painter of your own canvas. And with this knowledge comes responsibility. Not a burden, but an invitation to live consciously, intentionally, authentically, to align your actions with your deepest values, to speak your truth even when it is difficult, to stand up for what is right even when it is unpopular, to love without conditions even when it is hard, to forgive even when it hurts, to hope even when the future seems uncertain. And in living this way, you create a legacy that goes beyond your own lifetime. A legacy of love, courage, and wisdom that will ripple through generations to come, touching lives you may never know, changing hearts you may never meet, shaping a world you may never see. And in this way, your life becomes a sacred thread in the vast tapestry of existence, a song in the eternal symphony of being, a light in the infinite dance of creation. And as you embrace this truth, you find joy. Not the fleeting pleasure of momentary satisfaction, but the deep, abiding joy of living fully, freely, and fearlessly, a joy that sustains you through hardships, a joy that fuels your dreams, a joy that connects you to all that is good and true and beautiful in the world. And this joy is yours to carry wherever you go, a precious gift to yourself and to all who cross your path. And so you walk on, not as one burdened by fear or doubt, but as one empowered by love and hope. Not as one seeking to conquer or control, but as one choosing to be present and open, vulnerable and strong, humble and brave, imperfect and whole. And in this walking, this choosing, this being, you find the essence of your humanity, the heart of your freedom, the soul of your peace. And you realize that this is all you have ever needed, all you have ever sought, the simple, profound truth of being alive. And as the days unfold, you come to see that freedom, peace, and meaning are not treasures to be found somewhere out there beyond the horizon, but seeds planted deep within your own heart, waiting patiently for your care and attention, waiting for you to stop running and listen, waiting for you to stop resisting and embrace, waiting for you to stop fearing and trust. And as you tend to these seeds with kindness and patience, you witness their slow and steady growth, roots digging deep into the soil of your being, branches reaching out towards the sky of possibility, leaves unfurling in the light of awareness. And this growth is not always easy. It is often messy, tangled, painful. For as you peel back the layers of conditioning and fear, you encounter shadows long buried, wounds still raw, doubts that whisper you are not enough. But you learn that these shadows are not enemies to be defeated, but parts of yourself to be embraced. That healing does not mean erasing the past, but making peace with it. That strength is born not from perfection, but from the courage to keep going despite imperfection. And in this process you discover a profound tenderness for yourself, a tenderness that softens the edges of judgment, that melts the hardness of self-criticism, that nurtures the fragile beauty of your true self. And as this tenderness grows, it transforms your relationship with yourself and others, allowing you to approach life with curiosity rather than fear, with openness rather than defensiveness, with compassion rather than blame. And this transformation ripples outward, touching every corner of your world, changing the way you see, the way you feel, the way you act. And you begin to realize that the journey of self-discovery and healing is not a lonely path but a shared pilgrimage, a sacred dance in which you are both teacher and student, giver and receiver, seeker and guide. And in this dance you find joy. Not the transient joy of achievement or acquisition, but the deep joy of connection, the joy of being seen and seeing, of being heard and hearing, of being loved and loving. And this joy is not a destination but a way of traveling, a melody woven through every step, every breath, every moment. And as you travel this way, you encounter others walking their own paths, some stumbling, some soaring, some lost, some found. And you see in their eyes the same longing, the same pain, the same hope that lives within you. And in this recognition you feel the tender thread of shared humanity binding you together, fragile yet unbreakable, delicate yet resilient. And you understand that to truly be free is to be deeply connected, not to control or possess, but to open, to give, to receive, to dance in the great mystery of life with an open heart, a curious mind, and a humble spirit. And this understanding changes everything, turning isolation into belonging, despair into hope, fear into courage. And as you embody this truth, you become a living prayer, a sacred flame, a radiant light, not because you are perfect or invincible, but because you are real, because you are willing to show up, to be seen, to love without limits, to forgive without conditions, to hope without guarantee. And this willingness is the highest form of freedom, the truest form of peace, the deepest form of love. And as you live this willingness, you write a new story, not only for yourself but for all who will come after you, a story of courage and grace, of strength and softness, of pain and healing, of loss and redemption, a story that sings the sacred song of humanity in all its complexity and beauty. And this song will echo beyond your lifetime, a timeless hymn of the human spirit, a testament to the power of love and the resilience of the soul. And so you walk on, carrying this song in your heart, letting it guide your steps. Fill your days, shape your nights, until one day, when your journey here ends, you will pass this song on, a flame lit from the flame you carried, a light that will never go out, because the true power of being human lies not in what we conquer or achieve, but in how fully we love, how bravely we live, how deeply we feel, how authentically we are. And in this lies the meaning of everything. And in this vast unfolding of existence, you come to see that life is neither a race nor a battle but a dance, a delicate, ever-changing choreography that invites you to move with grace, to fall and rise, to stumble and soar, to hold and release, to breathe deeply in and exhale fully out. And in this dance, you discover the sacred rhythm of being, the pulse that connects your heartbeat to the heartbeat of the cosmos, the invisible thread that weaves you into the tapestry of all that is, the harmony that sings through the silence and the noise alike. And as you listen closely, you hear the whisper of truth, that you are never truly alone, never truly lost, never truly separate, for you are both the dancer and the dance, the song and the singer, the question and the answer, the seeker and the found. And this truth grounds you, anchors you, lifts you, frees you. And as you rest in this knowing, you realize that your life is a sacred gift, fragile and precious, fleeting and eternal, simple and profound, a gift to be unwrapped with wonder, a mystery to be embraced with humility, a journey to be traveled with courage and joy. And so you choose to live not in fear but in trust, not in scarcity but in abundance, not in silence but in voice, not in shadow but in light. And with every choice, every step, every breath, you affirm your humanity, your divinity, your unique place in this magnificent story. A story that began long before you and will continue long after you. A story that you are both shaping and shaped by. A story of love and loss, of pain and healing, of endings and beginnings. And in this story, you find meaning not by seeking it out in distant lands or hidden treasures, but by creating it here, now, in the small moments of kindness and courage, in the quiet acts of honesty and grace, in the simple presence of being fully alive, fully awake, fully yourself. And as you create this meaning, you become a beacon of hope in a world that often feels dark and uncertain, a reminder that even in the face of suffering and injustice, there is a light that cannot be extinguished, a flame that burns bright within each human heart, a spark of the divine that calls us to rise, to love, to heal, to transform. And as you answer this call, you join the great chorus of humanity singing its ancient song, a song of resilience and redemption, of freedom and peace, of unity and diversity. And in this chorus, your voice matters, your story matters, your life matters. Because to be human is not to be perfect but to be present, not to have all the answers but to keep asking the questions, not to conquer the world but to embrace it with an open heart. And in this embracing, you find your true strength, your true freedom, your true peace, and you carry this truth with you always, not as a burden but as a gift, not as a chain but as wings, not as an end but as a beginning. And so you walk forward, not alone but connected, not afraid but hopeful, not lost but found. And in this walking, this living, this being, you touch the sacred, you touch the infinite, you touch the divine, and you know that this is enough, this is everything, this is what it means to be truly alive. And as the sun rises and sets over the horizon of your days, you learn that time itself is not your enemy but your companion, a patient teacher who reveals the truths hidden in the folds of experience, who gently reminds you that all things come and go, that joy and sorrow are but two faces of the same coin, that beginnings and endings dance together in an eternal embrace. And in this dance, you find freedom not in clinging but in flowing, not in resisting change but in welcoming it as a friend. A guide, a catalyst for growth, for transformation, for awakening. And you begin to understand that the true measure of your life is not in its length or its achievements but in the depth of your presence, the fullness of your love, the courage of your vulnerability, and the authenticity of your being. And so you choose to live with intention, to act with integrity, to speak with honesty, to love with abandon, to forgive with grace, and as you do, you notice the subtle shifts within yourself. The softening of old wounds, the opening of closed hearts, the blossoming of dormant dreams, the awakening of a deep and abiding peace that surpasses understanding, a peace not dependent on circumstance but rooted in the very essence of your soul. And this peace becomes your sanctuary, your refuge, your strength in times of storm, your light in moments of darkness. And with this peace as your foundation, you face the world not as a battleground but as a garden, a place to nurture, to cultivate, to sow seeds of kindness and compassion, of justice and mercy, of hope and resilience, knowing that even the smallest act of love has the power to transform, to heal, to redeem. And in this knowing, you find meaning beyond yourself, a purpose that transcends personal gain, a calling that reaches to the very heart of what it means to be human, to be alive, to be part of the great unfolding mystery of existence. And as you answer this calling, you discover the profound truth that your life is not just yours but belongs to all, to those who came before, who paved the way with their struggles and sacrifices, to those who walk beside you now, whose journeys intersect with yours in unexpected and beautiful ways, and to those who will follow, whose paths will be shaped by the legacy you leave behind. And in this web of connection, this sacred interdependence, you find a deep sense of belonging, a profound gratitude, a humble reverence for the gift of life, and you realize that to live fully is to embrace both the light and the shadow within yourself and others, to hold joy and sorrow in equal measure, to welcome both certainty and mystery, to stand firm in your truth while remaining open to growth, to love without conditions while honoring your boundaries, to dream boldly while staying grounded. And in this balance, this harmony, this dance of opposites, you find the essence of wisdom, the heart of compassion, the soul of freedom. And as you embody this essence, you become a beacon, a guide, a witness to the possibility of a life lived with courage and grace. And you inspire others not through grand gestures but through the quiet power of authenticity, the gentle strength of vulnerability, the radiant light of kindness. And you see in their eyes the reflection of your own humanity, the shared longing for peace and connection, the universal desire to be seen, to be heard, to be loved. And in this shared humanity, this sacred kinship, you find your true home, your true self, your true freedom. And so you continue on your path, with open hands and open heart, ready to receive, ready to give, ready to live, fully, deeply, freely, lovingly, because this is your inheritance, your gift, your sacred task, to be fully alive in a world that will always challenge you, to hold fast to your freedom in the face of fear, to choose peace even when surrounded by chaos, to love fiercely despite the risk of pain, to walk your unique path with courage and grace, knowing that in doing so, you honor not only yourself but the infinite web of life that connects us all. And in this honoring, this living, this loving, you discover the true meaning of existence, not as conquerors or survivors, but as beings of light and shadow, of strength and vulnerability, of pain and joy, of loss and hope. And it is in this complexity, this contradiction, this mystery, that the fullness of life is found, and you embrace it with an open heart and a fearless soul, and in doing so, you become the very embodiment of freedom, peace, and love. And as you move forward through the unfolding tapestry of your days, you begin to see that every encounter, every breath, every moment, no matter how small or seemingly insignificant, holds within it the potential for awakening, for transformation, for a deeper understanding of who you are and why you are here. And you realize that life itself is not a problem to be solved or a puzzle to be completed, but a sacred invitation to engage fully with the mystery of existence, to lean into the unknown with curiosity and courage, to open your heart to the fullness of experience without judgment or resistance. And as you embrace this invitation, you find yourself shedding the heavy burdens of expectation, comparison, and fear, those chains forged by the world's demands and your own doubts, and you step into a new way of being, one marked by authenticity, presence, and compassion, both for yourself and for others. And this compassion becomes the gentle flame that warms your spirit, that softens the hardness of past wounds, that illuminates the path through confusion and despair. And in this light, you see clearly that to be human is to be vulnerable, to be imperfect, to be constantly in flux, and yet, in this very vulnerability lies your greatest strength, for it opens you to connection, to empathy, to love without conditions or limits, and as you allow yourself to be seen in your true, unguarded form, you invite others to do the same, creating a sacred space where healing and growth can flourish, and in this space, you discover the power of forgiveness. Forgiveness not as forgetting or excusing but as liberation, as the release of the heavy stones you have carried in your heart, freeing you to walk lighter, to breathe easier, to love more deeply. And with this freedom, you find the courage to face your shadows, to sit with your pain, to honor your losses, and to celebrate your triumphs, recognizing that all these pieces of your story weave together into a unique and beautiful whole, a mosaic of light and shadow, joy and sorrow, strength and fragility. And as you embrace this mosaic, you come to understand that there is no shame in your humanity, no failure in your mistakes, no weakness in your tears, only the profound truth that you are alive, that you are here, that you are enough, just as you are, and in this acceptance, this radical self-love, you find a wellspring of resilience that carries you through the storms of life, through moments of doubt and despair, reminding you that every ending is also a beginning, every death a doorway to new life, every night a prelude to dawn. And as you hold this truth in your heart, you walk with steady steps into the unknown, not as a victim of circumstance, but as a co-creator of your destiny, weaving your hopes and dreams into the fabric of reality with threads of intention, courage, and love. And you come to see that freedom is not a place to arrive at, but a way to move, a way to live, a choice you make again and again with every breath, every thought, every action. And this choice calls you to be present, to be awake, to be mindful of the beauty and the pain, the light and the darkness, the sacred and the mundane that surround you. And as you cultivate this presence, you begin to notice the subtle miracles that fill your days, the gentle touch of a breeze, the soft glow of morning light, the laughter of a child, the kindness of a stranger, the quiet strength of a friend, and you realize that these moments are not accidents but gifts, reminders of the interconnectedness of all things, the sacred web of light that holds you and everything you love. And with this realization, your heart opens wider, your spirit soars higher, and you feel a deep and abiding gratitude for the privilege of being alive, of experiencing this vast, mysterious, beautiful world in all its complexity and wonder. And you understand that your story, with all its twists and turns, its joys and sorrows, is part of a much larger story, the story of humanity, of the earth, of the cosmos. A story that stretches back through time and reaches forward into eternity, and in this grand narrative, you find your place, your purpose, your meaning, and you know that while your time here may be brief, your impact can be lasting, your love enduring, your presence transformative. And so you choose to live with intention, to act with kindness, to speak with truth, to love without fear, to dream without limits, to hope without hesitation, and in doing so, you become a beacon of light in a world that often feels dark, a source of healing in times of pain, a voice of courage in moments of fear, a spark of joy in days of sorrow. And as you shine your light, you inspire others to do the same, to embrace their humanity, to honor their freedom, to live fully and freely, and together, you create a chorus of voices singing the song of life, a song that celebrates the beauty of imperfection, the strength of vulnerability, the power of love, and the promise of peace. And this song echoes across the ages, across the lands, across the hearts of all who listen, and in this listening, in this singing, you find your true home, your true self, your true freedom. And you know that this is the gift you were always meant to give and receive, to be fully alive, fully present, fully human, and fully free. And in the quiet moments when the world seems to pause and the noise fades into a gentle hum, you realize that the journey you walk is not one of grand conquests or monumental achievements, but a subtle unfolding of awareness, a delicate dance between presence and becoming, a continual return to the essence of what it means to be alive. You see now that freedom is not something granted or taken, not a prize to be won or a status to be achieved, but a state of being that arises from within, from the courage to face your own truths, to embrace your imperfections, to welcome the full spectrum of your emotions without judgment, and to stand firm in the face of uncertainty with a heart wide open. This freedom calls you to live authentically, to shed the masks worn to appease others, to release the roles assigned by society, to break the chains forged by fear and expectation, and to step into the light of your own unique spirit. It is a freedom that invites you to love deeply and without reservation, to forgive generously and without conditions, to speak your truth with kindness and clarity, and to listen with an open mind and a compassionate heart. As you embody this freedom, you come to understand that it is intertwined with responsibility. Responsibility not as a burden but as an expression of your interconnectedness with all beings, a recognition that your choices ripple outward, touching lives and shaping worlds in ways both seen and unseen. With this awareness comes a profound humility, a softening of the ego's grasp, and a growing sense of reverence for the mystery and beauty of existence. You begin to see that every person you meet is a mirror reflecting facets of your own soul, every challenge an opportunity for growth, every loss a doorway to deeper wisdom, and every joy a sacred reminder of life's preciousness. In this sacred perspective, the line between self and other begins to blur, boundaries dissolve, and you find yourself standing in the heart of unity, held by the vast web of life that connects all things. Here, in this boundless space, fear loses its power, anger softens into understanding, and loneliness is transformed into belonging. You discover the strength to let go of grievances that no longer serve you, to heal wounds long buried, to release patterns that confine your spirit, and to open to new possibilities with a trusting heart. And with each step you take on this path, you carry with you the wisdom of those who walked before, their stories etched in the soil beneath your feet, their voices whispering in the wind that caresses your face, their courage and love woven into the fabric of your being. You realize that your life is a continuation of this eternal story, a verse in the song of humanity, a thread in the great tapestry of time. And so, you commit to living not for recognition or reward but as a humble participant in the sacred dance of existence, to walk gently upon the earth, to honor the dignity of every life, to nurture the fragile beauty of hope, and to stand as a witness to the enduring power of love. You understand that peace is not the absence of conflict but the presence of compassion, not the stillness of silence but the active engagement with life's complexities. And you choose to embody this peace in your words, your actions, your relationships, and your dreams. In this choice, you find liberation. Liberation from the need to control, to dominate, to conquer, and instead, a freedom to be, to create, to share, and to heal. And as you embrace this freedom, you become a beacon for others, a living testament to the possibility of transformation, a source of hope in a world hungry for kindness and understanding. Your scars become symbols of resilience, your tears wells of empathy, your laughter songs of joy, and your presence a sanctuary for those seeking refuge. And in this sacred role, you find your true purpose, not defined by external measures but by the depth of your love, the breadth of your compassion, and the courage of your authenticity. And so you continue on, knowing that the road may be long, the challenges many, the moments of doubt frequent, but also that the light within you is steady, the spirit that guides you unwavering, and the love that fills your heart limitless. For you have tasted freedom, not the hollow freedom of rebellion or escape, but the rich, deep freedom of acceptance, presence, and choice. And with this gift, you step boldly into the future, ready to meet whatever comes with an open heart, a clear mind, and a soul unbound. And in this living, this loving, this being fully human, you find the eternal truth, that freedom is not a destination but a journey that is yours to walk with grace, courage, and peace.